Welcome everyone to Awesome Truth, a wrestling book club. I'm your host, Steve Semino, and with me as always is my co-host, Walt Schwenk. Hey, Walters.
Hello, Stevens. How's it going?
My friend, it is going very well. Did you call me Stevens there?
Yeah, why not?
Because of Walters? Is that what you're doing?
I don't know.
All right.
Just wanted to say something different.
I was sticking to the script, and then I was like, I should ask him what it was.
Yeah. You know.
Well, I'm doing great, Walt. We're back on Awesome Truth, and we're talking about a book today. It is a big book, Walt. It's a huge book in the wrestling world. It definitely made some waves outside of the wrestling world. It's called Ringmaster, Vince McMahon and the Unmaking of America by Abraham Josephine Reisman. Josephine goes by Josie now, so just so everyone knows, we're going to refer to her as Josie the rest of the episode, but the credited name is Abraham Josephine Reisman. Well, Ringmaster is a huge book. It's the Vince McMahon biography, sort of. Like it identifies itself as the definitive Vince biography. We can talk about whether it is or is not actually that, but that is something that we've been hungering for a long time on this show. A book that actually does try and tell the entire Vince story. There really hasn't been an attempt or anything in quite a long time.
Yeah, I mean, I think we covered Sex, Lies, and Headlocks episode. It was the first 10 episodes.
I think it was episode 4. It was it was years and years ago.
Remember that time we used to read a book every 2 weeks?
Oh my God.
God, what a mistake that was.
Barely.
But yeah, it was a long time ago, and that book was I think published in early 2000s. I mean, I kind of have to fact check myself here, but so, it's been, let's just call it 2 decades since, and a substantial amount has been written about Vince McMahon.
2004.
Okay, yeah, so pretty much 20
almost
years.
20 years ago.
And obviously, It's like to the detriment and to the benefit of Josie to have written about this, because the cool thing is Vince is always in the headlines, and the bad thing is Vince is always in the headlines. So it's hard to really it's hard to place an organic stopping point for where the definitive Vince bio should really end. 2004 was certainly not it based on recent headlines, but I don't know if 2023 is going to be it. I don't even know if 2024 would have been it. So. But, I mean, obviously there's been a lot that's happened since 2004. So I guess it was certainly worth the revisit.
Yeah, and I'm sure when the book came out, Josie's probably like, wow, I timed this so well. Vince retires, I can sort of sneak that into the end. Crazy that I caught, this when it seemed like for a second that Vince might truly, truly be gone. But obviously, as we know now, in May 2023, Vince is somewhat unclear how back he is. But as we said in our Mania episode in our very recent archives, he's back to some extent for sure. Everybody knows that. He's back in a visible sense. He's back in a financial sense. And he certainly has not stepped away as he indicated he would at the end of this book, and as Josie wrapped writing the book. So yes, it is a time for Vince, but Vince is unkillable. Vince is always around, and you can never really time a Vince biography perfectly because there's always going to be more to happen.
Right, but I think though in 2023, or I guess when this was written, which was probably over the course of the last few years, I think it really was to the benefit of the beginning of the book, because this is the most we've ever really gotten on Vince McMahon's background and his upbringing. A lot of people were interviewed from very rural towns in North Carolina and across the southern United States that, old classmates and people from Vince's checkered past and oh yeah, I remember Vinny Lupton, yeah, and then he did this thing, and then it's but then this person said he was shy. It's this person said he was rambunctious, and this person said that he was neither of these things. It's I mean, it's good to get those stories though, because I've never seen those stories before or heard those voices or learned anything about this time outside of the Playboy interview Vince did way back when, and him offering information about his past. But a lot of these people might not be with us much longer because Vince is at a certain age, and the people who we went to school with probably are also at a certain age. So it's it's probably really good to get those stories on paper.
Yeah, and to just, if you're gonna obviously tell the somewhat complete Vince McMahon story, as complete as you can make it, you need to talk about his childhood and how he became the person he is. Like we've talked about it a million times on the show in wrestling bios. For wrestlers, maybe we don't need to know when I was 5 I did this, when I was 8 I did this, when I don't know if that's always pertinent to grew up to be a wrestler. But when you grow up to be the impresario of wrestling, the most influential person in wrestling history, I do like to know where you came from. And Josie's sort of thesis driving the book is, the creation of Mr. McMahon, the heel, the transition of Vince McMahon, the person, into sort of a heel character in real life and in wrestling life. And, there's definitely a lot in those early days, sort of as you said. I think the idea I took away was he was not a chameleon per se, but he was figuring out who he was. He really could, as most kids are, but it seems like he really wasn't sure what he was going to be. And obviously, when Vince Sr. shows up, a whole new path opens. But it is great to hear the upbringing of Vince and to hear the trials and tribulations. He had a very difficult upbringing. It does add a lot of color and depth to who the man became. Love him, hate him, find him to be a criminal, whatever your feelings are. Like, he had a tumultuous childhood, and you can draw your own conclusions into how much that influenced the man we know, but it definitely does add a lot of color and makes you think just about where this guy came from, like why he strives, why he can never be happy with what he has. Like, he definitely seems the kind of guy who had nothing and now probably has some sort of pathological fear to a certain extent of losing it all.
Yeah, and then the more we learn about Vince since 2004, like, the more that information matters more. It's like, there's a lot going on with this person. And I imagine a lot of that started when he was, like, growing up in an impressionable age. And, yeah, I mean, I think it was insightful just to learn more about that time. Because now, like, you're seeing all, I mean, I don't want to like play armchair psychiatrist, but, like, the stuff he revealed in that Playboy interview was, like, kind of just like, oh my God.
Yeah.
And then
brutally honest about very fucked up situations, like genuine abuse and mistreatment.
And it's like, look, I mean, I think in some ways it doesn't matter at all. And the decisions and the actions that this guy has taken over the last 50 years of wrestling promoting and business owning, like, part of me is like, what, like, that these are two separate things. But also too, it's like, I don't know, maybe this does educate some of his complexes and stuff. So all of that is to say is, like, the more we learn about this very complicated person, the more that those moments really did shape him in some ways that, his complexes are kind of what define him in many ways. I mean, you hear of, like, on this podcast, like, the way he reacts when people sneeze.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't know, maybe that's just, like, a weird tick he has and has nothing to do with his upbringing. But, like, I don't know, chances are it probably has something to do with his upbringing.
Yeah, like you said, we don't want to necessarily make if-then statements, or say, well, A certainly leads to Z, but he is a man of foibles and eccentricities, and, like, is, like, dead set committed, as we've heard, to all those things. Like, it's not like he has fun, little ticks. Like, he has, like, his life, like, revolves around them to a certain extent. Like, he judges people in their own standing based on how they respond to his own worldview. So that's intense. That's a lot. That's not how most people function. So whether that is brought about by something specific, whether he was always going to be that way, how the fuck do we know? But it is illuminating to hear about a childhood and an upbringing that is intense and filled with crimes being committed against him and upheaval and all these horrible things, and then to see him grow up to be a weird, power-hungry man. You do have to, as Josie does in the book, you do have to sort of say, there's probably something here. We'll never know what, but when there's smoke, there's fire.
Yeah, right. I mean, I think Josie, I think it's pretty clear that there was a lot of time dedicated to tracking down these people and traveling to get their fights, and it is very journalistic, and I think that's a really big undertaking. Like, where do you even start? Like, let me find this military academy in the middle of nowhere, and then go back to the yearbook at 19 whatever 68 or 74 or whatever, and look at the grainy picture of people, and hopefully that yearbook did a good job of capturing the people's names. Like, let's hope their names are accurate. And like, there's a lot that goes into that I think a lot of people don't really. It's like, and also too, again, like, not to harp on this one section of the book, I think it's an important section, but like, also it's like one of the few stories that like we don't have access to. Like, this is why a book like this exists, is to get access to these accounts and these stories, because other stories I've, and as cited in the book, there's so many different accounts of some of these things. Like, Brett's book is cited a lot, and other books are cited very often.
A little
like
JR in there.
Yeah, like, so like there's all these other people's like accounting of it that is like now part of like, it's just part of like everyday wrestling lore now.
Yeah, it definitely strives to be a compendium like that for sure, to have, as many voices heard. And obviously Josie mentions in the end of the book, did a ton of interviews with Dave Meltzer and Bret Hart. As you said, cited Bret Hart's book often, which is my favorite wrestling book of all time. I believe your second favorite wrestling book of all time. So definitely a good choice there, and a very definitive accounting in its own right of what the 90s WWE was like. I think the best part of this book, by far without a doubt, is the first half. I think the first half, like you said, Vince's childhood, and then also, the Vince, piecing together the Vince Sr. storyline, like the various things we've heard there, when Vince took over, how he took over, the first WrestleMania, like there's become sort of a narrative to those things that has been Vince and WWE pushed for years. It happened this way. It was crazy. Vince was and Linda were on the brink of bankruptcy, and then the miracle WrestleMania works out, and hooray. Like, there's a version they push, and Josie does a good job of, and some of that is true and some of it is not. And I think she does a great job of, it's not like a great unveiling of like tearing the mask off and saying Vince has been full of shit the whole time. It's just like, no, as everything with WWE, they just exaggerated intensely. They made chunks up and they filled in some gaps, and I think she does a great job of calling that out and just saying, like, the real version is usually like a little more boring, like, it certainly was a risk. It was a big deal. No one had ever really done it before, but it was really just Vince being sort of a cutthroat, incorporating, bringing everyone together, trying something new. Like, it was sort of just a thing Vince does. Like, it wasn't so much an outlier, and the outlier is that there's been 40 of them, not necessarily that they did one and it was a big hit and it changed the game.
Yeah, and the truth is always somewhere in the middle, right? And being honest with like, hey, this has been cited 100 times in this way, and yeah, I mean, I guess like, the word I would use for this is very journalistic, and I think that's important because with one of the most controversial and infamous characters, famous people in wrestling, it's like you're gonna get a lot of different accounts of the same story, and so admitting that, like, look, this was cited here, this is cited here, my conversation with this person led me to believe this, and so that's all the information on the table, and all we can do and say is, like, there's a truth. One of these is probably right, but there's a chance that none of these are right. That's how you're writing.
That is the WWE way. Like you said, it's in the middle, and if you talk to 7 people and they're wrestlers, at least half of them are lying to you, or exaggerating. There's what the quote from J.J. Dillon in there: wrestlers are like seagulls. All they do is eat shit and squawk all day. Which is a great quote from J.J. Dillon. And it does this, it's so funny to like listen to Bruce Pritchard and to read all these books as we have done for whatever 6 years now almost on the show. And like, wrestlers are such fucking gossips. Like, it's so wild. Like, it's you think of like when I was younger, I really thought they were the coolest, strongest guys, and they are cool and strong to a certain extent, but they are such like pissy babies sometimes, like it's wild over generations. There's been just such an it attracts such a unique type of person, and a lot of what that is like the gossip and the bullshit is always a key cog in whatever makes the wrestling ecosystem.
Well, it seems like they have a lot to bitch about
Yeah,
because Vince
that's
McMahon is a
true.
tyrant in many ways.
They are usually mistreated, and they are and they are weird ass people too. So maybe that both those things do play a role in it.
Yeah.
I will say though, you mentioned the journalistic thing a bunch of times, and I think that is really true. Like I said, especially in the first half, which I think is, it does a great job, and like certainly in trying to break down the various crimes committed. Jimmy Snuka and his girlfriends, Rita Chatterton, the alleged rape, the Ring Boys, Tom Cole, and like she does an amazing job in collecting all those stories. And those are another, like I said, that's another. Those I think you and I both have known chunks of those from various Dark Side of the Ring, viewings and other articles, other books. But to align them in this fashion, to like break it down, like you said, with that sort of objectiveness, and that here are the facts, here are the conversations, here are the depositions, here are the stories written at the time. Like so, it's not just those parts are very much not telephone, telegram, telewrestler. Those parts are here is the best I could do to recreate the story as it happened at the moment. And Vince gets away with a lot, and there's no doubt about that. If he's innocent of half the things he's done, he still should have went to jail for 50 years. Like he is a lot of some of the things that are trumped up, like the steroid trial, for example. Then there's crimes he's committed that are far more outlandish and hurtful, and he's just skated ice free. So it's I like that because it does, and I don't think he is. If you look at all the big time CEOs in America, probably a lot of them have checkered histories as well. But I appreciate that there is this version now of that big part of the Vince story, that important part of the Vince story, his crimes and misdemeanors, is now outlined for everyone to read, and you don't need to hunt it all down yourself. Josie has put it all together for you.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's been out there yet or not, but the Ring Boy scandal and like the beat by beat of like, I can't remember the poor kid's name, but
Tom Cole was the one original kid, and then his brother was involved too, I believe.
Yeah, the brother's accounting of like every second of the day with the lawyers and the manipulation and like going on. Was it Sally Jesse Raphael?
Yeah, Phil Donahue, I believe.
Oh,
right?
Sorry. No, there was another thing.
Like all these people were on like a major talk show that's probably watched by millions of people. Like it wasn't like it's weird how that got memory hold, and probably because of the power of Vince McMahon to a large extent. But it's wild it wasn't like it just happened quietly and disappeared. Like it was big news for a second there.
Back when like talk shows like that were
back when Phil Donahue was like a big deal.
So like going beat by beat through that story was pretty remarkable is not the right word, but like it's pretty intense. I guess I'll use that word.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of like information like that exists in those sections, and really plants you back in time. And I mean, again, like, is this the truth? Like, I don't know, but I've never heard that version of the story before.
Yeah, and it's and there's a chunk of it that is sort of he said Vince and the lawyers and Tom Cole and his brother, like those certainly, but Lee Cole and Tom Cole, they didn't get the chance to say, they don't have a megaphone. They're not millionaires. They don't get to just say whatever they want. They don't get to brush things away. So even if, who knows how accurate their version is, we don't know that. No, we can't unfortunately suss that out. But it's to give them a megaphone and the mouthpiece here to tell their version of the story, to tell what they remember, and to corroborate it, as Josie tried to do with what happened in the actual events, is great. Like that's just, they never had that opportunity before, So there's a justice there, even if it doesn't actually do anything, to actually hearing that side of the story in a straightforward way and putting it plainly from their perspective, and you can you can assess it as you will. Like that's, like you said, that's the journalistic side of things. That's how it should be, is you give a voice to the voiceless to a certain extent, and you allow them to share their thoughts right next to the billionaire, and you put them both out there and you say, here's the situation, you take it from here.
Yeah, so I mean, again, those are all great.
Great in the context of like great book, good booking, good like booking with a dash, like good writing, good researching, all that.
Good job.
Yeah, good job, great job. I will say though, well, there's I don't know if we agree on this one, and not to slander the book too much, but I do think there's a certain point in the book where it goes from the story of Vince McMahon and WWE, which of course are intertwined, to sort of a little more of a beat by beat. Here's what was happening on the wrestling show this month to the next month to the next month. And I think that's where the book loses me near the end, because I get what is being built towards. Like, it literally is building towards a reveal, which I don't know if that would have been my choice to build towards. But I just don't know if that wasn't really the way it was going the first half. And I will say I was not as enraptured by that. I think that's where you lose. Like, A Ring of Hell, another book that is very journalistic that we both really enjoy, doesn't get it, like, comes at wrestling from a very external perspective and tries to, and sometimes, as I think we said in that episode, lays it on not thick, but just, talks about wrestling as if like you never heard of it before, and discusses things that seem insane to outsiders from an external perspective. Like, oh my god, I can't believe this is just what they do. And there's in reading it that way, there is some value in being like, wow, like, I'm so used to this being a part of wrestling, it is pretty disgusting to see it in another context or through other eyes. I think this book tries to do that to a certain extent at the end, but is a little too in the weeds and talks about things that are like inside baseball, and I don't think it has the same detachedness that Ring of Hell had. And Ring of Hell, of course, is about a much bigger legitimate crime, and that is the center of that story. This one I just think gets into the minutia in a way that I don't think services the point that was sort of being built in the first half.
I mean, I did appreciate going beat by beat on the higher power, the greater power.
It is the stupidest. If you're trying to enrapture like how dumb things were and how on the fly decisions were made, it is a very good example of that.
Yeah, but like, because it was so great, kind of like reliving that weird moment in time in wrestling, because that was like vintage Attitude Era, late Attitude Era, I should say. I don't know, with the ministry doctors and stuff. But yeah, I mean, I do think that like, would it have benefited to spend a little bit more time in the 20 years after that storyline to kind of like maybe dive into like, not that I wanted them to go to the Benoit story, but like, I thought that was a pretty important moment in wrestling history that Vince was at the middle of, for sure, especially for their response. And we kind of cut to the end with COVID and Trump, and part of me is like, was there really nothing else between the years of 2007 and like 2020? Like, or like, is the Saudi deal and Trump really the other only big things that really happened in that time frame? And it's like, I mean, the way he was presented here, it sounds like the answer is no. That's it.
Yeah,
higher power, and then COVID.
Like you said, the like, not to spoil it if you haven't read the book, which we do recommend doing, but the book itself ends at the higher power, and then it's called the higher power, right? I always forget that. Right?
What's greater power?
Is it the greater? No, it's the higher power, isn't it? That's so stupid. It's the higher power.
Okay, I don't know what you think. Greater power.
Just read a whole book about it, and I can't remember what it is. But yeah, that's like, I get that is sort of the apex of Vince, like we said, the apex of Vince bullshit, the apex of Dobie up there on assness, the reveal of Vince pretending to be a good guy but ultimately being the bad guy after all, and then, as Josie said, it's like basically commits to being a heel for most of the rest of his in-ring career, never really goes back on that. Like, okay, I get that does serve the broader narrative, like, it's the one time they sort of eased on Vince as a tweener and then said, never mind, he's actually the ultimate bad guy. And everyone said, huh? And scratched their heads. And I would say after that period, there probably was 20-ish years of everyone scratching their heads, at various storylines. Once the Austin Rock stuff sort of went there, then wrestling became up and down, peaks and valleys, with certainly a lot of valleys. But I find it weird, though. You said there's so much that happened in between. Like, I don't want an 800-page book that goes over all the stuff that bad. But it just seemed like a hyper focus on the '90s, where certainly a lot happened. Austin, the Attitude Era, DX, Michaels, Owen Hart dying, like Vince becoming a bad guy. I get like why you focus on that more. It was Vince's highest peak. It was huge for all of them. But yeah, I just think there is, if you're going to tell a story, which this book ultimately is trying to do, beyond being the Vince biography, it's trying to tell the story of how wrestling has shaped America. Wrestling has shaped American culture, American as a people, all these things which are sort of tucked into the epilogue. I just don't think the higher power is your mic drop moment where you're like, and then nothing, a bunch of stuff happened, and then Trump, and now America's bad. And it's like I don't disagree with your thesis and your ultimate findings, but you didn't really show me the work to get there. I don't think.
Yeah, I get it. It's like a parallel and it's a metaphor, but like also like we the stuff that we're going through now with this guy is like that's the story of Vince McMahon, not necessarily like the apex of the character on screen. Like, yeah, that's part of it, but like that's just but like the biography should cover the non-fictional biographical moments of this guy's life and career. And it's just, I mean, like maybe there really isn't a whole lot in the last 20 years, but like I thought there might have been. I guess there's not.
I don't know. I think this feels to me, the end of the book, for whatever reason, and I don't think this is how Josie intended. I'm sure this is what she wanted to write. Hopefully it was. But it feels to me like you're playing a big budget video game. Like you're playing a Metal Gear Solid 5, which I don't know. I don't believe, Walt, you've ever played Metal Gear Solid 5.
Fortunately, I've not.
The game, literally, you get to a certain point where the game doesn't seem like it's going to be over, and then it just sort of stops, and there's a bunch of like random side missions, and there's a couple little tucked away other missions you can do to extend the story a tad, but the main story itself just kind of ends. And you go, huh? And you find out later, if you read about it, that they ran out of money, they ran out of time. They just sort of like, they had to just cobble together an end to the game, as opposed to telling the full game they wanted to, because Hideo Kojima was a psychopath, and he didn't have the capacity to do everything he wanted to do. Obviously not a direct one-to-one parallel to this, but it just felt like the higher, like you said, there's certainly more from 99 to 2022. Like, there's just no way that's not true. So, if you're trying to tell a Vince McMahon story, I sort of get why you'd stop at the higher power. If you're like, and then this is the apex, this is the again, this is the crystallizing of Mr. McMahon the bad guy, Vince McMahon the heel, like, and I want to stop there. But then if you're gonna tack on, oh, and by the way, this is also a parable about America now. I guess I just don't think there is that connection there. I don't think you did the homework there enough to get me to that point. I think you did a good job with the Vince stuff, and then I think maybe the thread was lost along the way, and the broader theme that you're trying, which I don't think is the strength of the book, I don't think really comes through and fully lands with a punch at the end.
Yeah, the whole idea of neo kayfabe is like, I get it, but I don't think the history books are going to like refer to Donald Trump's run as neo kayfabe. It's just yes. Like Donald Trump's presidential run.
She cites a Gallup poll which says like 20% of Americans were wrestling fans. And I'm like, okay, there's not, wrestling was really big in 1999. I get that a lot of people, more than ever probably in history, really cared about wrestling. But 55 million people were not watching Raw. They were not watching WrestleMania. They weren't going to like this. That's impossible. Like, there's no way that was the case. Like, even just because, unless you're saying if you've heard of Stone Cold Steve Austin, then maybe I might say, okay, I believe 55 million people are aware of Stone Cold Steve Austin. I don't know if that qualifies you as a wrestling fan. And again, I don't think it connects the dots in that those people all grew up to be weirdos, and that now we are in the place that we're in because of wrestling.
Yeah, I would have made fun of a lot less if everybody was wrestling fans.
You and I wore ECW and Stone Cold shirts to school, and everyone thought we were stupid. Yeah, we would have been. We would have fit in with the crowd in that world.
Where was that 20% to defend our honor in middle school?
It was the quiet majority. Yeah, everyone wasn't speaking up.
Yeah, but I mean, like, then again, though, like, I'm sure there's probably more people out there like wrestling than baseball at this point, potentially. Maybe. I mean, like, if you're looking at it statistically speaking, and
possibly, yeah, you can make the argument.
Or an NHL.
NHL, you definitely can make that argument.
So, I guess I have to agree with the poll in this one. I mean, I guess everybody just loves this shit.
Yeah. I mean, the argument, there isn't much of an argument either to the idea that Vince and Trump clearly are friends, and they both are big, blustery, loud people who've gotten angrier and angrier as they've gotten older. Like, that's a slam dunk, I'd say. It's pretty hard to objectively argue with that. So if you're arguing that, like, Vince's style of existing has become sort of more socially acceptable and has become, allowed in politics, and even though it's been exposed to the light, he still is allowed sort of to do his own thing and has suffered very few ramifications, like, that's a point I think we can all agree with to a certain extent. Like, that does seem to be the case.
Right. Well, It's
It's a complicated. Like I get why people have not told this story, and I get why thinking back to the
tough.
9 Lives of Vince McMahon doc we watch. I can see why people softball it all the time because it's a tough one to tell.
Yeah, I mean, it's ambitious to try and connect those dots though, and it's. I think to your point, it just takes more time to kind of establish that a little bit more. But yeah, I mean, it's tough. It's a tall order. This whole book. When I heard they were making it, I'm like, wow, it's ambitious. But
Yeah.
good luck.
And I can
Uh,
see, and if there's a subset of people out there who like wrestling but have not, are not, if you're listening to the show, you probably don't fall into that subset. But like, you're a wrestling fan, you've been a casual wrestling fan for years, but you don't rip open biographies, you don't go on the dirt sheets, you don't listen to Dave Meltzer, you don't consume podcasts. If you're that kind of person and you read this book, I could see someone being like, this is the best page turner I've ever read. Like, oh my God, like, what a sordid underbelly wrestling has, and what a bad guy Vince is, and oh my God, he did this, he did that. Like, there are probably people out there who are reading this book and are genuinely like, wrestling is atrocious, and like I'm loving this read. I think part of the problem with doing the show, problem in quotes, is you and I know so much already and have talked to authors and experienced so much of these stories that there's just when like you said, when you're rehashing things we already know, even if it might be a slam dunk to some people, it's hard for us to read it and go like, yeah, I already knew that. I don't think that has the impacts that to me that it probably was meant to have.
yeah, there's a lot of retread. I mean, the Vince story. I mean, that's I think that's just organic, and that's kind of that's just the territory at this point when you're telling the story of wrestling with Vince. It's like you're gonna learn about the territories. Hey, let me tell you about Jim Crockett Promotions and Sam Mushnick, and it's like, okay, yeah, oh, yeah,
Or the
did
screw
you
job,
know?
like you said. Like I can see how you want to do that, or because you want to tell the screw job because you want to talk about Owen, and those relationships meant a lot to Vince, and they are key in the telling of the Vince story. But yeah, I think that does. But I think that impulse bogs you down. When you're getting into the minutia of Bret Hart and Ultimate Warrior and Hogan and all these guys who have value and are outsized. But then I feel like you sort of got to get in the weeds with everybody, and you can't get in the weeds with everybody. Even in the '90s, when there are a lot of things that do illuminate Vince's character and his choices and all that. I think it does bog you down a little bit because there's too much wrestling bullshit. Like
Yeah,
it's so hard to separate Vince and WWE, but I feel like you have to try because WWE is just its own weird environment that is impossible to explain properly and dissect the right way and explain the ramifications. Like it's a lofty task, like we're saying, to try it all, and
yeah.
it's no one's fault for if you can't do it because I don't think it can possibly be done in a perfect way.
I mean, the way that like Benoit biography and Pillman are a little bit more like focused, and through their journey, you see different promotions. You can kind of organically talk, but like, yeah, the Vince one just becomes such an undertaking of explaining context and history and business ramifications, and it's just inevitable. Which is why probably the other books feel a little bit more tight with regards to like covering a career and content and being, again, I guess focus was the right term. Not that this is unfocused. I mean, it's very focused, but like it's just so much content. And
Yep.
we did not want a 1,000-page book. So
No,
like,
you and I don't at least. And yeah,
correct.
maybe that's why the Brett book is the best Vince book. Like because the Brett book, like Vince's story, is oftentimes best told through how he interacts with other people. And his interactions with Brett are among the most impactful he's ever done with anybody in wrestling. And the Brett book is probably the most honest telling of a Vince interaction, at least from my perspective. So maybe that's why when you try and tell the Vince story, you're never going to get overwhelmed. When you can tell the Vince story, like you said, through what happened to Benoit, what happened to Pillman, what happened to Brett, it's never going to be full, all encompassing. But you get so much insight from them that maybe that in some ways is sort of better.
That's right. I mean,
Maybe. But then, who knows? But I get the impulse to want to do more.
yeah. I mean, it's more until it's too much, and then
Yeah.
it's
Yes. It extremely is, but it's a good book. It's a great read, and well, maybe we're gonna talk to Josie all about it. We'll see. TBD. I may edit this out if this doesn't come true, but very strong chance we'll be talking about Ringmaster a little more. But for now, Ringmaster, Vince McMahon and the Unmaking of America. It's everywhere. It's Amazon. It's bookstores. It's all over the place. It's a big deal, and it's a good book, and it is an honest, genuine attempt to try and chronicle the Vince McMahon story, which, as we said, may be untellable. But Josie tried very, very hard, and it's quite an endeavor. And I think it gets the coveted treat endorsement from Awesome Truth, right?
I was about to ask you where does it land on the treat.
Yeah, let's give it a treat. I can't. Yeah, in talking about it, I think in talking to you about it, I got even more sold on it than I already was. So I'm gonna give it a treat. A treat for the effort, at very least, and I think a treat for a lot of the accomplishments. Like I said, the first half is there's enough there where I felt satisfied reading all that, because as like a little journalist boy, I was like, okay, doing the homework here is appreciated.
If it's a treat on your meter, and I don't even have a meter, then I have to just go with treat.
Is your meter just following my meter then?
I guess so.
Or no meter, or just choosing not to have a meter?
I kind of disagree. I just either like silently nod or like shake my head, depending on whether you call it a treat or not.
All right, that's good to know. Well, I'm going to give it a treat. So you can silently nod your head or whatever you want to do in response to that.
You can't see it, but it's a silent nod.
Well, if you want to hear more about our various things we discussed on this episode, Hitman, Sex, Lies, and Headlocks, all the wrestling books we've covered in our millions of years doing the show, you can find all those archives at awesometruth.libsyn.com. If you want to find our episodes just on your phone, on your wherever, you can subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, everywhere podcasts are delivered, we are there. And you can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at awesometruthpod. Well, great to talk Vince with you. We're never gonna get the full. I've learned more about Vince McMahon than like any historical figure I've ever studied in my entire life, and I still don't think we got the full story, and that is pretty ridiculous.
Yeah, some say we might never know the full true story, but this is very close to what I would hope for.
And who knows? Maybe there'll be an add-on someday, because, like you said, the story is not ending anytime soon. So Vince lives, and we'll see when Vince dies. But right now he's out there.
Yep.
Well, thank you all so much for listening. And remember, the truth will set you free.